If you've been here for even a second, you might know that I'm obsessed with sport. What you might not know though is I'm also obsessed with good design. Sport has a lot of good design in it. Of course, graphically, it's what tells the stories. But I want to talk to you about the design that gives athletes that edge. In sport, victory often comes down to milliseconds, millimeters, or that smallest edge. It could be the shoes that grip the turf or the bras that make movement possible. Good design doesn't just look good, it changes how women compete and win. It changes how women play, compete, and win. This is where performance meets purpose, where good design wins. Hi, I'm Nandita. Welcome back to the Ready Set Girl show and this episode of Good Design Wins. Boy, this is a good story. Once again, we're talking about a garment that is an essential, but it came from scandal and even has a criminal record. People in the 1900s were so dramatic. Today, I want to talk to you about a sport that we haven't covered much here, swimming, or anything in the aquatic category. We didn't always have the swimwear that we have today. I mean, that's not a surprise. I don't think there were many 18th century women wandering around in bikini. Today's swimwear is expected to fulfill varying requirements, not just be good enough to cover you in the water. For competitive swimmers, they need a streamlined and tight-fitting garment which reduces friction and drag in the water to enhance propulsion and buoyancy. Recreationally, it can be a little bit more fashionable while maintaining its function. Exploring the evolution of this garment not only gives an insight into fashion trends and technological advancements in materials and design, but also an exploration of female liberation. In the 18th century, sea bathing became a popular recreational activity. It was believed that there were considerable health benefits to bathing in the sea, thus it was encouraged both for women and men. However, immersing oneself completely was discouraged. This was deemed particularly important for women as activity in water was not seen as sufficiently feminine. For bathing, women would wear loose, open gowns similar to the kameez. These bathing gowns were more comfortable to wear in the water, especially when compared to their more restrictive day clothes. In the 19th century, the popularity of recreational aquatic activities surpassed the desire to bathe for health benefits. With this, the loose-fitting kameez gowns became increasingly fitted and more complex, replicating the silhouettes of women's fashion. And I'll let you imagine the silhouettes of women's fashion at that time. Their main characteristic was, well, covered. Back in the 19th century, the biggest priority for women taking part in water activities wasn't comfort or speed, it was modesty. Swimming for fitness wasn't really a thing yet. Most women just paddled or bathed gently because anything too vigorous was seen as unladylike. And their swimwear reflected that mindset. A typical outfit included a long bathing dress, drawers, and stockings often made of heavy wool or cotton. Of course, once they soaked up water, they became almost impossible to move in. So instead of helping women enjoy the water freely, their swimwear actually mirrored the restrictions they faced in everyday life, both socially and physically, in a society that prized propriety over practicality. I'm sorry, did I say that correctly? Because I know you think you misheard me. Their swimwear was made of heavy cotton or wool. I don't think I've ever heard of anything less practical in my life. They were dressing women to be anchors, not floats. What in the world? During the Victorian era, at a time famous for its strict moral codes, women went to great lengths to stay modest, even at the beach. One of the most fascinating inventions from this period was the bathing machine. Picture a small wooden hut on wheels pulled by horses into the sea. Women would step inside to change in privacy and then quietly slip into the water without being seen. By the 1880s, swimwear hadn't got much easier to move in. Women still wore bathing dresses with high necklines, long sleeves, and knee-length skirts, usually made from linen or wool. A belt at the waist mimicked the fashionable silhouette at the time, and underneath they wore loose bloomer-style trousers to keep things modest. Towards the end of the Victorian period, a new design called the princess suit became popular. It was a one-piece outfit that connected the blouse to the trousers with a skirt over the top to hide the body shape. Most were made in dark colors, so you couldn't really tell when the fabric was wet, but they were heavy, restrictive, and made swimming more of a struggle than a sport. Still, the princess suit marked a turning point. It paved the way for the modern one-piece swimsuit. By the 1890s, styles began to evolve quickly. The trousers got shorter so they wouldn't peek out beneath the skirt, and fabric shifted from flannel to lighter knits like serge. As women slowly gained more freedom in the water, their swimwear finally started to reflect it. I want to say freedom is a loose term, but it was the 19th century, progress was slow, but even that was huge. The 20th century brought huge changes to women's swimwear, thanks to the new materials and more relaxed attitudes towards fashion and the female body. By the early 1900s, swimming was emerging as a proper competitive sport. It had made its Olympic debut in 1896, though only for men. Women weren't allowed to compete until 1912, when they finally dove into the games for the first time. A big part of the shift came from one trailblazer, Annette Kellerman, an Australian swimmer and performer often called the Australian Mermaid. She helped change how society viewed women in the water. And I can't wait to tell you about her. Born in 1886 in the Sydney suburb of Marrickville, Annette Kellerman would become a global sensation, a pioneering athlete, silent film star, and health guru. She was diagnosed with rickets as a child and wore steel leg braces until she found swimming as a way to build strength. She left Australia at 18 for London and quickly made headlines attempting the near impossible, swimming across the English Channel. She got 3/4 of the way across the English Channel in 10.5 hours in 1905, according to the 1953 Boston Sunday Globe article, a record at the time and an attempt that captured the attention of the world. Though she didn't finish, the effort alone was enough to capture public attention, especially when she did it in a one-piece bathing suit. It was a bold rejection of the full coverage, multi-layered swimwear women in the early 20th century were expected to wear. Most women at the time would have thrown a skirt over their swimsuit and called it a day, Hayley Shapley, a journalist specializing in fitness, told WBUR. But Annette didn't want to constrict her movement, so instead she sewed some black ties into the bottom of the suit. She expanded the accepted notions of what was proper in terms of bodily display. Peter Cox, curator of the 2016 $1 Million Mermaid Annette Kellerman exhibition at Sydney's Powerhouse Museum, told the BBC, and made it possible for a generation of women to learn to swim. But this is the garment that also got her arrested. How though? Despite the success early in the English Channel, her bodily display was not received well on the other side of the pond. Kellerman, ever the rebel, showed up on a Boston beach in a sleek one-piece swimsuit that left her arms, legs, and neck uncovered. Far too daring for the era. Lifeguards were horrified and she was promptly arrested for indecent exposure. Instead of backing down, she defended herself, arguing that women couldn't swim properly while weighed down by layers of fabric. The incident made headlines around the world and turned her into both a celebrity and a symbol of change. She seemed to have a sensible judge on her side who saw her point, agreeing that heavy, ill-fitting swimwear made no sense for an athlete. What was once seen as scandalous soon became the standard, and Kellerman's one-piece would go on to inspire generations of swimmers after. Ironically, while her courage helped push women's swimwear toward more freedom and functionality, it also triggered a backlash. In some places, authorities doubled down, enforcing strict modesty laws at beaches. Still, Kellerman's stand had already made waves and there was no turning back. In the 1910s, swimwear started to change slowly but surely. The Portland Knitting Company, later known as Janssen, began producing woolen suits for rowing clubs, which quickly caught on with the public. By 1921, they were calling them swimsuits. Around the same time, Speedo in Australia was experimenting with similar all-in-one designs for both men and women, short-sleeved or sleeveless tops with long legs. Society was beginning to loosen up, but fashion companies still played it safe, continuing to market these as modest bathing suits. After World War I, women's swimwear started to look different depending on where you lived. In America, swimsuits were sporty and practical, while European styles were made sleeker and more form-fitting. The popular one-piece Malliot was a big improvement from earlier decades, though still not perfect. Knitted wool soaked up water, stretched, and sagged. By the 1920s and 30s, swimwear wasn't just for swimming, it had become fashionable. Designers like Coco Chanel and Jean Patou started creating elegant one-piece suits, and high-end labels such as Lanvin and Schiaparelli sold them in chic seaside boutiques. Magazines like Vogue began featuring swimsuits on their covers, turning them into symbols of modern style. By the mid-1930s, the boyish look of the previous decade had faded. Women wanted more shape and support. The swimsuits of the time, like the 1937 wool one-piece, featured ribbed panels for contouring, thin straps for sunbathing, and a brief-style bottoms to balance modesty with freedom, marking the beginning of truly modern swimwear. At the 1932 Olympic Games in Los Angeles, Australian breaststroker Claire Dennis was almost disqualified because of her swimsuit. After conquering the final of the 200-meter breaststroke with the best time, a protest was lodged against Dennis by some international judges who considered her costume inappropriate because it exposed too much of her shoulder blade. The Australian delegation appealed just in time to readmit Claire to the final, and she won the gold medal with a new Olympic record. Only 4 years after Claire's scandalous shoulders, the world of swimming decided on a different approach. Less is better. As little material as possible was used to cover the athletes' bodies. In 1936, we see the first bare-chested men in swimming pools, while women wore models similar to the ones we use today in training, with thin straps and tight fabric on the body. Big steps forward in the swimsuit technology came in the late 1950s when the industry began using nylon in swimsuits to create smoother and tighter models. It was also discovered about this time that one of the best characteristics of nylon is that it is almost impermeable to water. In addition to those technical aspects, the aesthetics began to play a role as well. The first prints appeared in this period. The swimsuits were marked with drawn lines, stars, and colors other than black. The biggest swim news in the 1970s was the massive use of swim caps, which became a necessary accessory. A new suit was introduced in 1976. This technology marked the start of the compression era in swimsuits. The compression suit was worn tightly, and swimmers would go down 1 or 2 sizes from their regular fit. These suits were called paper suits due to the texture of the fabric, because when dry, they did feel like paper between the fingers. In the 80s, following fitness fashion, women's swimsuits were more high cut than they are now on summer beaches, and lycra was added to the nylon fabric. Lycra would remain the material used until the revolution of the 2000s. Speedo first introduced nylon into swimwear in 1956 for the Melbourne Olympics. They created the well-known male Speedo shorts. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the technological advancements in materiality were prioritized for use in male competitive swimming before female competitive swimming. However, it was not long before women's competitive swimwear also utilized the hydrodynamic qualities of nylon. In the 1970s, Speedo introduced elastane into their swimwear. The combination of elastane and nylon significantly reduced water drag and improved the durability of swimwear. As the new millennium approached, the argument was that the suit should completely cover the legs. This was the first time people started to divide the market between swimsuits to be used in training and ones to be used in competition. The new millennium completely changed the game for women's swimwear. In 2000, Speedo introduced the fast skin suit, inspired by the texture of shark skin. The idea was to mimic how sharks move efficiently through water. These suits compressed the body, smoothed the skin, and channeled water flow to reduce drag. When swimmers debuted them at the Sydney Olympics, records started tumbling, and the sleek, full-body look became iconic. By 2008, things went to another level with the Speedo Laser Racer. Developed with NASA's help, this suit used polyurethane panels that trapped air to increase buoyancy and minimize drag. At the Beijing Olympics, 94% of all swimming races were won by swimmers wearing laser suits, and nearly every world record was smashed. But the advantage was so extreme that the International Swimming Federation stepped in. In 2010, full-body suits and non-textile materials were banned from competition, marking the end of the supersuit era. After the ban, brands had to get creative within the new rules. The focus shifted from buoyancy to compression, muscle support, and movement efficiency. Suits like the Laser Elite 2 and the TYRF Victor used woven fabrics, bonded seams, and strategically placed panels to support key muscle groups without restricting motion. The new generation of suits didn't just make swimmers faster, they helped them feel faster, offering a psychological boost through precision fit and stability in the water. The technology also became more inclusive, with designs tailored to women body shapes and movement patterns, not just scaled-down versions of men's suits. Today's competitive swimwear blends science, sustainability, and personalization. Modern suits like the Speedo Laser Pure Intent or Arena Power Skin Carbon Glide are designed with data from motion analysis, 3D body scanning, and even computational fluid dynamics. They're lighter, thinner, and faster drying than ever before, with micro-level fabric structures that channel water flow like race car aerodynamics. At the same time, brands are becoming more mindful of the environment. Many high-performance suits now use recycled polyamide or eco-conscious production without sacrificing speed. The latest innovation, customization. Elite female swimmers can now get suits tailored to their exact body proportions, stroke type, and racing style, blending engineering precision with individual performance. To win a swimming race, you can rely on your strength, your talent, and a bit of luck, and not much else. In the pool, it's only you and the water. However, one thing that can influence your performance is what you're wearing: the cap, the goggles, and of course the swimsuit. Your choice of swimsuit influences the race more mentally than physically. At one point, female swimmers never had this option. In fact, their swimsuits would hinder their performance if anything. But now, thanks to some good design, winning has never been easier. Thank you for watching. See you next time on the Ready Set Girl Show.